When an umpire walks on the field, a lot of times the teams maybe have had that umpire in the past, and probably they have after a certain length of time that you've been doing this. And when you walk on the field, you don't want the teams to all sigh and say, "Oh no, it's going to be a long day." And one of the worst things that can be said of you as an umpire is they don't believe you. And if they don't believe you right from the start, it's going to make your job really difficult. Sometimes you got to make the tough call, the tough decision. People don't like it. And then you show up the next day or you show up the next game there and they still don't like you because of that call. And that's not something you can control. But you can control how you carry yourself on the field. And hopefully that's with confidence, but also with a willingness to hear people out and understand that we're human beings, understand that you're fallible and you're not going to get 100% of every pitch correct. There's only been one game in the major leagues that's ever been tracked as a 100% strike zones. It happened in the World Series, in the Philly against Houston series, which I think was 2022. That's only happened once as long as they've been tracking pitches. So you're going to have some humility to know you're not going to call a 100% game.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bob Couture, host of Where the Twain Meet. Welcome to our series of chats and interviews that I hope will shed new light on the subject of dispute resolution. Areas where our human competitive and cooperative impulses, the core elements of conflict, are melded together into alloys of behavior that may not always prove predictable. We'll look in places where you'd expect the subject to be examined, but also perhaps where you might not. Our agreements, truces, deals, legal judgments, alliances, bonds of love, victories, losses, even works of art, created by some magical alchemy? Or are there real axioms, proven methods, which guide us through the churn of conflict to meaningful resolution? I think about Rodney King's simple plea during the 1992 Los Angeles protest riots. Can we all get along? Can we all get along? That wasn't just a question. It was a proposition too. Is that proposition impossible to achieve or even ridiculous to seriously consider? Let's talk with folks who may tell us something that we don't know, and let's try to find more answers. Of course, like many good things in life, some of the remedies are probably in plain sight. But on this show, we'll do our best to probe ideas simple and complex and not look the other way.
Matt Couture currently serves as senior producer at the ABC affiliate WLNE in Providence for Nightside Broadcasts, overseeing editorial content for the 6 and 11 p.m. broadcasts. He previously served as senior producer for WLNE's Good Morning Providence broadcast, overseeing morning and noon shows and working on special projects, including education and election coverage. Matt is a baseball umpire as well, working games on the Little League Diamond, as well as the Babe Ruth and travel team games. I've known Matt since he was a kid and watched him grow up to be a real baseball and media expert. He's the son of Paul Couture, one of my favorite cousins. I smile when I think about Matt coming from a family of baseball aficionados, going back to our fathers and uncles and their fathers too. I still remember my grandfather always having the game on Saturday afternoons in summer, that black and white zenith at the center of the living room. I remember the adult conversations at family gatherings, sometimes heated about the Red Sox, Ted Williams, Collier Stremski, etc., but none of us became such a student of the game like Matt. He's got much to say about baseball, the rules of the game, and the associated social underpinnings for young athletes in a world of shifting ideas about authority and live, in-person action. Hope you enjoy our discussion today on Where the Twain Meet. Matt Couture, welcome to the show. I'm really pleased to be talking baseball with you, especially. When your dad and I were kids, we would always talk baseball and the Boston Red Sox. That's what our uncles discussed at family gatherings, and so did we. Funny, I still remember how upset your dad was back in 1965 when the Red Sox traded Eddie Brosseau, the New York Mets. Eddie Brosseau. He was their shortstop. Not a big star, but your dad loved him. And I don't know if you know this, but your dad actually became a Mets fan after that trade. That was radical. He might as well have told everybody he was leaving the church. Nobody could believe it.
Well, we've still got some Brosseau memorabilia around here, so.
You do?
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing. he just latched on to Eddie Versu. But it says something about your dad. Eddie Versu was a real player. He wasn't trying to be a star. He just put in his time. But your dad eventually came back to the Red Sox, and now here you are, a producer, sportscaster, a baseball umpire. And as you well know, there's a lot of passion in sports, and your role is not just about calling balls and strikes. What inspired you to become an umpire?
Well, it's interesting. I started when I was 13, so that was actually the first year eligible that you could do it at the time. So it was certainly something that I wanted to get into. And at the time, I was a player, obviously, as most umpires are before they become umpires. And I would think sometimes as a player, as we all do, hey, I could do a better job than that. In terms of some of the officiating, you get called out on strikes, stop back to the dugout. And you think, hey, I could do a better job than that. So I decided to put that to the test when I became eligible to do it. So the story goes from there 14 years later.
When we were growing up, we always heard all about sportsmanship, like it was a moral good. Is it still a relevant aspiration for kids playing sports?
I think so. And you know what? The league that I have primarily umpired in for many years, every year they give out at their opening day ceremony a sportsmanship award to a player or a group of players, in some cases a couple of players, that best exemplify their definition of sportsmanship on the field. And I'm always interested to see who gets the award, because as an umpire, of course, I've dealt with all the players for years in a lot of cases, because usually the award's given to a player who's graduating from the small diamond up to the big diamond to play Babe Ruth League. And it really always, they've gotten it right. And you can distinctify who are the really good sports and who aren't. And I think that's probably the most meaningful award they give out, because it says that player or those players exemplify exactly what you want to see on the field, which is they're competitors. They care about the game. I don't think good sportsmanship means that you don't get upset sometimes at yourself or at the umpire or at the other team, but you're able to compartmentalize that a little bit, go back to the dugout and slam something in the dugout instead of making a scene on the field. And baseball people, as I think you know, are fond of saying that 90% of the game a lot of times can be mental. You can have raw skills, but not have the mental part down. And so when we talk about sportsmanship, I always think about it that way. You can have talented players who, if they're poor sports, coaches don't want them on the team. That's the bottom line. They won't have it. They won't put up with it at the higher levels. That is a meaningful award for that reason.
What's at the root of sportsmanship? What is it that people value in the idea of sportsmanship?
I think when I'm out on the field, and that can be from any games from 8-year-olds to high school. So the 8-year-olds or the 9-year-olds are not going to have the advanced definition of sportsmanship that somebody might have in high school. I think as competitors out on the field, you don't want it to be like a country club, but to me, it starts with the way that the players interact with each other. One of the kids hits a double and somebody gets on to second base. The shortstop says a nice poke. Something simple like that, that to me shows good sportsmanship and shows me as an umpire, if I'm out there on the bases that day, we're going to have an all right day today. As an umpire, you're always concerned about managing the emotions of the game, managing the tensions of the game, especially at a higher level, especially if it's a playoff game or a game of some significance. And so to me, it just starts with that respect, a mutual respect, whether it be between player and umpire, player and team, player and coach. All three of those show me sportsmanship. So to me, it is about respect. It's also about playing the game the right way. But we see sometimes major league players, they'll dog it to first base and they'll just get crushed. They'll get crushed in the press or they'll get crushed on social media. And, the guy hustling out a ground out, to me, that also plays into that, because that's respect for the game. So it's respect for the game and respect for the participants on the field that really defines sportsmanship.
So do you find that you have a role in helping to create that environment? Essentially, it's an ethical environment in some ways.
I think we do. As umpires for most games, we're going to run what we would call a plate meeting. And at that plate meeting, we get both coaches together and we lay out our expectations. In fact, at the high school level, in some states that I've umpired in, there's actually a sportsmanship statement that is read before the game to both coaches, and they bring out the captains. And it's a specific statement about the expectations for good sporting behavior that day, as they would say. We did that in New Jersey. So yes, we really set the tone at the beginning of the game. I think by the way we walk out there, the way we present ourselves, and the way we speak about the game and what we're going to accept. Some umpires have a different way of going about that plate meeting than others, but generally speaking, we're outlining the ground rules for the field. We're introducing ourselves, and we're kind of laying out those expectations for mutual respect throughout the game. And what goes a long way at the higher levels, not so much in a little league game because you have so many different teams, players, coaches, you don't get as familiar with them usually. But in a high school game, a college game, something like that, it starts with the coaches and the umpires at the home plate meeting, shaking each other's hands and learning each other's name. And then when there's a problem throughout the game, let's say a coach is going to come out to me, they might say, "Matt, what did you have there?" Instead of yelling across the diamond, as we often see, and they're yelling, "Blue, what do you got?" You know what I mean? That difference between saying someone's name and calling them blue is something that we see at the higher level that is the type of sportsmanship and the type of respect thing that we establish right from the get-go. And that in turn should apply with us as well. Whereas I'm going to deal with a coach called Brian, let's say. "Hey, Brian, I saw it this way. I saw him under the tag." So even little nuances like that, to me, it starts right at number one, right at that plate meeting. So that's where our role starts in that. And then during the game, our role really continues throughout in keeping the game sportsmanlike. If we detect that there are problems between the teams, tensions are rising, we have a number of tools in the toolbox to deal with that. I tell young umpires, you've got tools in your toolbox, so use them. Oftentimes that's a conversation with the coach between innings. Maybe the shortstop is getting into it with the runner on second base, and you want to alert them if they could talk to their player and tell them to cool it a bit. As you continue to escalate, we have what we would call a bench warning to each team that we could give if there was tension throughout the game. And basically, that's the umpire stepping out in front of home plate, typically pointing to both dugouts, saying that's a warning forcefully, and trying to say, "Right here, we're done with the conflict." And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, of course. But we certainly have tools throughout the game to continue to try and maintain a sportsmanlike atmosphere. And as one umpire I've worked with for a long time says, baseball is supposed to be a gentleman's game. And so that's how we try and keep it.
To follow along with the expectations you've created and the idea that you have a situation where tensions are ratcheting up. If you're in essentially a forcing situation where you have to bring down the hammer, have to throw someone out, does that ever work?
It depends on the day. Sometimes if somebody became totally out of control and got ejected from a game and it was an already tense game, that first player, coach, whatever the case may be, maybe there was a fight, not maybe a physical fight, but a verbal jousting. I've had situations like that where the two coaches are yelling across the field at each other, and I'm in the middle saying, "I'm not going to sit in the middle of this much longer." So the next guy in is going to go. And sometimes that will send the message, the final and eventual message that we're done with this for the day. Sometimes it doesn't work. I mean, you can have days, and you see this in Major League Baseball, of course, as a longtime fan of the game, where the umpires legitimately cannot control it. If you try and get control of a game back with an ejection, sometimes that works. Sometimes you can make it worse with an ejection because now you've turned the whole stadium against you. So it's a 50-50 on that.
And sometimes the coach will use the ejection as a strategy, right? You could just see they're driving to it.
You see that less at the lower levels. Sometimes at the higher levels, actually, coaches will come out or managers will come out. And now we're getting into some stories that retired Major League Baseball umpires have told in their books or on other podcasts. And they've said basically that you as the fan, you're sitting in the stands at Fenway Park and you see the coach come out yelling and screaming at the umpire. And he might be yelling and screaming at the umpire, "You've got to throw me out. I need to fire up the team." And it looks like he's just undressing the guy, right? But really he's asking to be thrown out. And the umpire might say, "Well, you're going to put on a good show if you want to get thrown out." So they'll throw their hat or something like that. That really only happens at the higher level. I can't think of a time off the top of my head talking to you right now, somebody's come out to me ever and said, "You've got to throw me out of this game." That just doesn't happen at high school with Little League. I mean, if it did, that would be ridiculous because it's such a different thing where it would be such a poor demonstration of sportsmanship at our levels, whereas it is part of the game at the higher level that sometimes a coach will come out and it will legitimately work. It will legitimately fire up the team. They go and score 4 runs in the bottom half of the inning, something like that. That's more of a higher level thing in terms of people asking to be ejected or trying to get ejected, I would say.
In terms of the mechanics of your job at home plate, how do you manage making consistent calls?
But I've taught classes for mechanics for umpires locally. And if it's a slideshow or something like that, or it doesn't matter, whenever I send out the email or send out the class, I try and always call it timing and positioning for our mechanics class because those are the two things, period, that you have to have for consistency as an umpire. I got that from a talk that Major League umpire Jerry Lane gave years ago. That really, I thought, simplified things perfectly. The positioning part is something you learn over the years. You go to mechanics classes, you watch videos, you go to clinics, and you know what position to be in, for the correct call. We have so many different positions that we get into that the average fan wouldn't believe what we're doing, what we're thinking about on a given play. When we have a play coming to home plate, for example, we have what's called the keyhole we're looking for. We would get into what we would call the wedge. These are terms that the average fan would not be familiar with. And we're basically following the catcher's glove side hip. We start at the point of the home plate, and we're letting the catcher take us to the tag, to that keyhole, where we're trying to see the swipe tag. It's going to be a swipe tag. If it's going to be a collision type play, we might adjust. But more often than not now, because most leagues, Major League on down, have banned the collisions, you're going to see a swipe tag. So that's the technique that's come into common practice over the past few years, is that keyhole wedge technique. That's to call plays at the plate. When you talk about timing, that is the key for the balls and strikes more than anything. The key everywhere on the field. But for the balls and strikes, if you want a consistent strike zone, you have to have timing. And when we teach timing, we talk about, and by the way, we're always striving ourselves for better timing. Even those of us that teach timing and teach how to be better with your timing could be better with our own timing. We always say we could be better with our own timing. And what we teach with timing to the umpires is wait to hear the ball hit the glove, take a second, think about what you saw, and then make the call. If you're calling it too early, you're going to miss it, especially if you got a late breaking pitch, something like that, and you've made up your mind and then whoop, there it falls off the table, then you're going to miss the pitch a lot of times. Now, what's interesting is we teach timing. And then you go down and I watch a 9-year-old game or an 8-year-old game, or I go umpire a 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 8-year-old game. And I find that because an umpire has better timing, more veteran umpire typically has better timing, they struggle with that game because those games really demand a bigger strike zone because the kids are younger and they can't throw pinpoint perfection. Older players are expected to be able to do. And the umpires that are newer and younger, I find often have a better strike zone for that level because they haven't yet learned the timing. And typically the pitch from a 9-year-old is coming in more as a floating pitch, right? So if they're identifying that pitch before it hits the mitt, they're identifying it in the right place. They're identifying it when it's actually slowly crossing over the batter. Whereas if I'm identifying it and waiting, I see the catcher catch the ball off the ground, that I say, boy, that must have been a ball, but it might have gone for a little trip right across the batter's letters. That's what we teach though. Timing and positioning, the two biggest things for umpiring mechanics.
How do you communicate decisions to coaches and parents in a way that diffuses tension?
We talk about that a lot, especially with the younger umpires, the newer umpires, is to sell the call. We say sell the call. So if it's a close play, make the coaches, the fans, anybody who's there, the players, make them believe you, make them believe that you have it right. So if I stand there on a very close play and I take 5 seconds to make the call and then I just make a weak signal like that or something, they don't believe me. They think I'm guessing, right? Whereas if I sit there, I have good timing, I have good positioning, I check to make sure there's possession of the baseball, let's say on a tag out, if I'm going to call the tag out, and then I sell the call with, it doesn't have to be a dramatic mechanic, but it has to be a mechanic that says, I'm confident in my call, then they're going to believe you. And, a close play, you're going to get questioned anyways. But if you're in the right position, you hustle to get there, and then you sell the call, you're 9 times out of 10 going to get less guff than you would get. If you're in bad position, you don't sell the call and you don't exude a competence in what you're calling.
So what you're doing is, to some extent, like a lot of things, performative.
Yes, there are performative aspects, and we teach it. We teach it. Now, if you're going to sell the call and you're not confident in it, then people might be able to see through that. Hopefully you are confident in it and you're selling your call confidently because you're confident in it. But you're right. We teach what we would call an escalation, maybe. Maybe that's not the right word, but that's a good way to describe it for the average person. An escalation of mechanic. So if it's a very routine play, you're just going to call him out. If it's a very close play, you're going to punch him out. Because with the intensity of the play and with the closeness of the play, we want to put an emphasis on a call that shows that we're confident in what we're doing out there.
How about your reputation in the industry? How does that affect people's reactions to your calls, to the calls that you're selling?
Very important. When an umpire walks on the field, a lot of times the teams maybe have had that umpire in the past, and probably they have after a certain length of time that you've been doing this. And when you walk on the field, you don't want the teams to all sigh and say, "Oh no, it's going to be a long day." And, sometimes that is just what it is. And you can't escape that. But if you're getting 95% sigh and it's going to be a long day, then that kills you right off the bat, because we just talked about making them believe you with the calls. And one of the worst things that can be said of you as an umpire is they don't believe you. And if they don't believe you right from the start, it's going to make your job really difficult that day. So that's important. Sometimes you got to make the tough call, the tough decision. People don't like it. And then you show up the next day or you show up the next game there and they still don't like you because of that call. And that's not something you can control. But you can control how you carry yourself on the field. And hopefully that's with a confidence, but also with a willingness to hear people out and understand that we're human beings, understand that you're fallible and you're not going to get 100% of every pitch correct. There's only been one game in the major leagues that's ever been tracked as a 100% strike zones. It happened in the World Series, in the Philly against Houston series, which I think was 2022. It would have been last year. That's only happened once as long as they've been tracking pitches, a 100% game. So you're going to have some humility to know you're not going to call a 100% game. And there have been times where I have, let's say on a play at second base, I can think of one example, a summer tournament game I was working, and I got behind the play. It took me by surprise for some reason. I can't remember exact details, but I didn't get a good look at the play at second. I saw that the ball beat the runner and the tag was down. So I called the kid out and he jumped up like he couldn't believe that I had called him out. And I knew that player to be, as we've talked about in terms of sportsmanship, to be a good sport. And so I figured that combining the factors, that he was a pretty good sport and I was out of position from where I would have liked to be, that I had probably missed the call. And he wasn't too happy. But when he came out the next inning, he was playing in the outfield. And when he came out the next inning, I stopped him on his way out to the outfield. I said, "What did you have there? You thought you got under it?" And he said yes, that he thought he was under the tag. The tag was up high on him. And I said, "I believe you." I said, "I got behind it a little bit. I might have missed it." I said, "Shake it off. Don't sweat it." I said, "If I missed it, my bad." And sometimes that type of humility is what will be required, I think, on the field. We're not perfect. We don't have instant replay at my level, certainly. Being willing to admit that in certain situations, I think will give you a better reputation for the future. And it's not too often that that would happen. It's got to be the right person that will take that and say, "You know what, Matt does a pretty good job. And I appreciate that he was willing to say that." It can't be somebody who is going to just pop off and start jumping around in the middle of the field, say, he admitted he missed it, right? But for the large part, that can go a long way too in maintaining an umpire's reputation, is being willing to admit when you were wrong. And in Major League Baseball now with the replay, they really have the benefit of not having to do that as much because they'll get corrected right on the spot. But that's part of it at the lower levels, certainly.
Do you ever find yourself trying to make up for a bad call?
That would be a no-no. And I know the fans think that's what happens, but That never really enters our mind. First of all, people think that we have time to think about making a makeup call. We are working hard on every play, on every pitch to get the pitch right, to get the play right. We don't have time to think about doing a makeup call. And by the way, 99 times out of 100, we don't know, hey, I just missed a pitch. I mean, there is that once in a while that we say to ourselves, oh man, I missed that. The much better route would be to acknowledge that miss if somebody asks, right? If the player comes out after the inning says, where'd you have that one? And you said, well, I had it on the outside half, but I might have gone out there a little bit on that one. I might have gone out there a little bit on that one. Don't sweat it. Something like that. Much better than trying to give him one back. All you're going to do is create what would be an inconsistent strike zone for yourself and cause yourself headaches the rest of the day. And it's not fair to anyone out there. I mean, you got to move on when you miss a play. That's an important thing. When you miss a pitch, you can't just beat yourself up the rest of the game over it, or you're going to miss the next one. One of the umpires that has trained me over the years and has worked with me over the years always says you got to be able to flush it. You got to be able to flush it. And we will, as umpires, as a group, we will beat ourselves up for the misses. People think that we just move on and it's no big deal. So when I say you got to be able to flush it, you got to be able to flush it in that moment and not affect the integrity of that game. But we'll go to the car after the game and say, damn it. And then we'll lose sleep over it at night. You know, if we think we might have missed a big play or we think we missed a pitch. We really do, as a profession, and it doesn't speak for everyone, but it speaks for 90% of the profession. We really do care. We really do care about getting it right. And we really do beat ourselves up if we feel that we fell short. But you can never affect the integrity of the game on the field like that by trading calls. It's just not something that any umpire worth their patch that they're wearing or worth their certification would consider.
Matt, earlier you were talking about the notion of selling a call. So in other words, the way you make a call is part of the way you express your judgment, and that balances with other ways you make calls. And it takes a certain narrative shape, as opposed to the idea of a computer making the calls. How do you feel the advent of video assisting calls and technology itself coming into the adjudication process? How do you feel that affects your work, and how does it affect the game?
It's different for us than it is for, let's say, Major League Baseball. Let me start there at the highest level. I'm a traditionalist. I didn't like when the replay came in the first place. Now we're talking almost 10 years ago now that they started with that, with the home runs, which was the first thing, the boundary calls. I didn't like it then. I don't like it now. I don't like what it's become. I don't like that you can have a guy a half an inch off the bag. His cleat is barely off the bag, and we're going to go replay that and call him out on a double, let's say, or a triple. As an umpire, what I can tell you is that those boundary calls that they originally put it in for, the home run, fair or foul, ground rule double, fan interference, those type of calls can be very difficult. And especially at the major league level with all the fans out there, I don't know how they get those right as often as they do. They're impressive on those plays. So I think that they like that. I think that they like it for that. Some guys like it for everything, but I don't like it for everything up there. I think it hurts the game. I think baseball was always an imperfect game, and the effort to make it perfect, I think, has just made it worse. With the balls and strikes, you have the potential for the robot umpire, as they call it, to come in for 2025 or later. And I really think that would be just changing the entire fabric of the game. The replay on the calls on the bases is one thing. The balls and strikes is a whole new world. It just would disrupt the flow of the game to me. And the umpire strike zone has always been part of the game. For pitchers, the teams will scout the umpires. They'll know their tendencies. On any given day, you might say that umpire's giving me an extra inch outside. I'm going to attack that spot. And the hitter might say, umpire's giving him an extra inch today. I'm going to have to protect out there. It's just always been part of the game. It's always been part of how we teach the game. It's been part of how we coach the game. It's just been part of the game. So I see it as really trying to ruin the game, ruin the fabric of the game, to put in all this technology with the robot strike zone. But they are certainly coming along with it. They have tested it for years now. They've got it at the highest level at AAA doing testing, the highest level that's not Major League Baseball. And they're testing it with their best prospects. They've tested it, I believe, in the Arizona Fall League. They're certainly thinking about it. And I really think that would be a shame. And I've always thought to myself, if they ever do that, these high school games that I umpire, these games, and maybe the college game, if the college game doesn't go to that, these games will truly be the purest form of baseball. You'll have robots calling balls and strikes up at the big leagues, and we'll be down here still doing it the old fashioned way. And I'd rather watch that game than I would watch a game called by a robot at the big league level. I'd rather go watch a college game or a high school game where it's the old school way. As far as video affecting us at the lower levels, even though we don't have instant replay, of course, it has affected us because we're on tape a lot. A lot of games, parents or coaches will set up a GoPro on the backstop now, which is easy, very easy to do. They're affordable now. When they first came out, it was like, oh, GoPro camera, right? Now, a lot of people have those. You almost feel like you're being evaluated every second, and you need to feel like you're on tape every second. Maybe it creates more accountability for us because we should be behaving like professionals out on the field. We should be striving to get every call correct. The only time it becomes a problem is when some parent comes up shaking their phone at the fence saying, I have it on replay, you got it wrong. Then it becomes a problem and disruptive to the game. And that does happen. In fact, I worked with a great tournament director in Dighton, where I've umpired for many years. And he basically said at one point, we're not doing the video thing. Anybody who brings a phone to the fence is going to have to go watch the rest of the game in the parking lot. But that's something you never would have thought of 10 years ago. It's evolved so much. There's so much video now that sometimes that happens. But for the most part, the video affects more the major league level than it does us at this point.
Going back to that meeting you have at the beginning of the game around home plate, how do you manage collaboration with the other umps? I know at the lower level, you probably only have one other guy out there, right?
Like sometimes you're alone. I mean, sometimes you're alone for the little league games. But when we have two or, the highest I've worked is really 3 or 4 for a championship game, maybe. But that's important. Crew communication is incredibly important. Anytime we have more than one umpire, we have a bunch of signals with each other that the fans might say, what are they doing? It looks like we're doing sign language to each other almost a lot of times, but it's basically just our umpire language. If there's one out and the infield fly rule is in effect, for example, we'll point to our hat like that. If you see us do that, we're just communicating to each other that we've got the infield fly rule in effect on this situation. So we need to be aware that if there's a situation that requires that call, that we make it. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We have all kinds of signals on how we're going to rotate on any given play. So there's a lot that goes into that in terms of communication. And one of the more important things too is that we have each other's back out there. If there's a disagreement and it's getting heated in some sense, the other umpire maybe steps in. The second umpire steps in and tries to calm the waters, right, before something escalates. And might say to the coach, why don't you walk with me and let's walk and talk. Try and walk him back to the third base coaching box or something like that. And hopefully be able to put out the fire a little bit. So that helps to have 2 people in that sense or more, is that you can manage conflict a little bit better too.
In terms of that team you're creating, that collaboration among the other umpires, I'm just curious, are you conscious of generational or even gender differences that you manage or you think differently about?
Yeah, I think, generational certainly makes an impact. You might have a day where there's one umpire is 22 years old and the other umpire is 70 years old. And umpiring has been taught a different way over the years, right? So they might need to get together. What's so important in that sense is what we call the pregame for the umpires. And that really happens in the parking lot before the game at any given game site, where we're getting together and talking about our signals and making sure we're on the same page. You might have a guy who did it a different way for 50 years, and that's his way of doing it. And so on that given day, you might say, okay, we'll do it that way. So generational certainly makes an impact when we're dealing with such a wide array of umpires. And we don't work in crews really at our level. So you might be with one guy on Monday who does it differently than the guy on Wednesday. We try and do it so that we teach everyone the same mechanics, and that doesn't happen. But of course, there are subtleties that are different. In terms of the gender piece, it's not often right now at the local level that we're working with somebody of a different gender out there. Certainly it's male dominated umpiring baseball, but I have trained female umpires that have gone on the field and they've been capable and impressive. Even at the highest levels now, at AAA now, there's a female umpire that's working her way up. and would be considered right now one of the top prospects in the umpiring pool in the sense that she's reached the next highest level to Major League Baseball. She's worked games in prestigious leagues like the Arizona Fall League. Really, it has been opened up a little bit in that sense over the past few years.
Has there been any discussion about methods of recruiting folks other than men into the profession?
I wouldn't say there's been a discussion specifically about that so much as there has been a discussion of we'll take anybody who can do the job, because recruiting is the name of the game right now. It's hard to get umpires, hard to get people who want to put themselves through some of the, not only the rigorous training, but the commentary that you can get out on the field from the spectators. So I think recruiting is a big piece, and we'll take anybody into the fold that is interested and willing to umpire. I don't think, to answer your question, that there's anything specific where we say we want this type of person or that type of person. We just want anyone who can do the job. We want you. That's how it is right now.
How do you manage your own emotions when tensions escalate on the field?
That's important. And basically, you've got to remember that you're out there to be a professional and you're out there to do a job. And if you come unglued, then the whole thing's all over. You know what I mean? And because we're the one out there to be the fair and impartial arbiter. And so we are the one who has to maintain a certain level of composure throughout the game. An umpire is a human being, and sometimes we fall down on that, but hopefully not in the sense that we completely lose it, right? Hopefully in the sense that maybe that second umpire comes in and says, all right, I'm going to get in between this one and send you two back to your corners. But that is so important to the job that you always appear and always are impartial. I mean, without the umpire out there to be the impartial arbiter, it might as well be a sandlot game. You are legitimately there to make it a ball game, a regulation ball game. So that is important, and of the utmost importance, that we maintain that impartiality.
That's an interesting distinction, the idea of the regulation game and the sandlot game. And I haven't thought about that in a long time. I played a lot of sandlot ball and regulation ball too. And there was a difference. It seemed like there was more in line with the regulation games somehow. Have you thought about the difference between the two?
Certainly, we've all been part of both, right? Or many of us have been part of both. And I think sometimes they try and bring back that sandlot feel now. There are some leagues that'll do like sandlot games during the summer where it's just the kids out there, no umpire. The fans aren't breathing down everybody's neck. And I think what they're trying to bring back is just the joy of the game in its purest form, just like it would be in the old days. You gather in the neighborhood up in the cul-de-sac and play a game of baseball. It is totally different when you put an umpire on the field and you put a scoreboard on the field. When you do that, everybody, their attitude changes. There are some people you get in between the lines and they're a totally different person. That competitive mode turns on and it is a different ball game out there until the final out is made or the final pitch is thrown. So that's the difference to me, is that the sandlot game is meant to be fun and pure, whereas the regulation game, shall we call it, you just get that more competitive edge no matter what. When there's a scoreboard up, that competitive edge comes out.
Do you have a sense of how much sandlot ball the young folks are playing now?
Less than it was. The game is not attracting as many of the youngsters as it once did. And I think they'll be successful. I see it coming back a little bit in the sense of, I didn't think I would like this pitch clock, by the way. And then I went to a couple of games with the pitch clock, and you don't even notice it, but it's a quicker game. And the attention spans today are lower than ever. And the players now, the younger players that they're marketing to the younger generation, these are exciting young players. They really have a social media presence. It's different now where you can kind of engage with the players if you're a younger kid or a younger fan in ways that you never could before. And I think it'll come back in that sense. But there's certainly less of that sandlot feel than there used to be.
Going back to your role as a kind of disciplinarian in the regulated game, do you feel that also imparts a feeling of fairness on the field?
Yes, I think that's what everybody desires when they walk out there at the beginning of the game, is they just want a fair game. And you know what? We hear as umpires a lot, people will say, be consistent, be consistent. Usually they're talking about the strike zone, right? Whenever you hear somebody say be consistent or you're being inconsistent, they're saying, in essence, you're not being fair to us. You're giving them the benefit of more pitches that are outside the strike zone than we're getting. As umpires, we don't like when somebody says to us, be consistent or be more consistent, because that is really an attack on our integrity. What you're essentially saying is you're cheating. You're calling it for the other guys. But that's such a thing in baseball. People feel that the umpire is being inconsistent. Sometimes it's true. In the major leagues on down, you can have a game where you have one really good catcher that catches the ball right on the spot, frames it up perfectly for the umpire. And by frames it up perfectly, I don't mean takes it and drags it 5 feet. I mean, catches it, sticks it where it was, umpire gets a good look at it, boom, strike. Whereas you might have another catcher who has poor technique and they're blocking out the umpire. They're standing up. They're not in the right position. They're reaching across to catch a pitch. The pitch hit the inside corner, but they reached across their body to catch it. It looks like a ball to everyone in the park, including the umpire. And they block you out when they're coming back across. Those types of things can influence consistency. But fairness is important to us as it is to everybody else. And so when we talk about consistency of the plate umpire especially, that's basically what that means. You're not being fair. So as an umpire, you take that personally a lot of times because that's our number one job, is to be the fair, neutral, impartial arbiter of the game. That's very important to us, and it's very important to the teams and the players because you hear that so often about the consistency.
How much does lack of knowledge about the rules of the game contribute to conflict on the field?
Well, it's funny. I was just talking to somebody about this a couple of days ago, and I said it's changed since you and I were out there 10 years ago. The knowledge is less than ever of the rules now. It really is. And people often are so convinced that they're right about the rules or about a particular play that just happened. And they could be so far off the universe that that it's ridiculous. But as an umpire, someone comes out, maybe it's a coach, says something ridiculous to you about a rule. I can think of one, maybe the average fan wouldn't know this, but the foul lines have nothing to do with the baseline. But I've had coaches come up and say, well, he ran out of the baseline. What the heck is the chalk there for? He's supposed to run on the chalk. And that has nothing to do with each other. But that's just something that somewhere they picked that up. They believed that to be true, and they were convinced that that was true. So if you look at them and get the googly eyes and say, you're crazy, that's not how we do the job. That's how you escalate a situation. The right way to do that would be to say, coach, by rule, the player can only be considered out of the base path, and we would call it the base path, if he runs 3 feet or more to try and avoid a tag attempt away from the base path that he establishes at the point of that tag attempt. And so when you explain stuff, you say by rule, and then you explain the rule to them, oftentimes that'll de-escalate the situation. If you say it confidently and you say it the way it is. And so that's why knowing the rules is so important, because you do have coaches at the higher level who know the rules really well. And if you don't know the rules as an umpire, and there are umpires that are weaker on the rules, and if you try and talk your way out of it, you're going to talk yourself into a whole big world of new problems. Baseball's a complex game. There are a lot of rules. I have a book here somewhere that lists about 550 differences between the major league rules, the college rules, and the high school rules. Each level has its own set of rules, and it's hard. It's work to know the rules, to know the differences between the rules, to know that on one day you're doing a game under the Cal Ripken Little League rules, and on the next day you're doing a game under the high school rules, and that this is different from this is different from this. It is harder work than people think, especially at the lower levels, because we're dealing with those multiple rule sets. We can be one place one day, one place the next day with 60 different rules. Maybe it's minor on some of them, but some of them are major. I'll give you an example. Major League Baseball. If you have a guy on first base and the pitcher balks, but still throws the pitch, let's say it's a quick pitch or a no stop, he doesn't stop, or he's trying to quick pitch the batter and he doesn't come set. You call the balk in Major League Baseball, so that's a balk. You let the play finish out. So let's say the batter hits a home run. All runners, including the batter runner, advanced at least one base safely on the play. Obviously, the guy from first scored on the home run, and the batter hit a home run. He scored. The balk is ignored. In high school, if we have that same situation, you're going to call the balk, and we have to enforce the balk as a dead ball situation. So we're going to call the home run back. The home run never happened. We're going to move the runner from first base to second base that was originally on first, and we're going to bring the batter back to the plate with the same count. And everybody's going to go crazy because the kid just hit a home run, and we're going to take it away from him. But it's a different rule. On a Monday, I could be working a travel ball game that uses Major League Baseball rules, and I need to enforce that properly as a home run. And on Tuesday, I could be working a high school game, and I need to enforce that properly as a dead ball penalty. And so that is unbelievably important that you be competent and well read on the rules, or else you're going to walk yourself into the most sticky of situations out there. It always comes to get you. And even the best of us on the rules will see something new on the field someday and say, wow, I need to look that up. And by the way, the best umpires, they travel with their book, and something happens out there and they look it up and they look it up and they look it up. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen stuff on the field. Next year would be my 15th year umpiring. And now I know this is the enforcement. I'm confident this is the enforcement. So experience can also be the best teacher in terms of the rules, because you go out there and you see it happen and you say, what is that? You look it up and you know it. I've been long-winded on the rules because it is so important.
Have you ever considered a connection between people's idea of fairness on the field and their sense of justice in a larger sense off the field?
I think so. It's funny because we were having a good laugh the other day, myself and a group of work colleagues, about a reference that somebody made to the Supreme Court. And they said the umpires on the field are the Supreme Court of the baseball law. And so I think people do see it that way. We're the judge and jury out there. And I think it is intertwined somehow, that whatever people conceive of justice on the ball field, they probably conceive similarly of what justice should be in the law and in society. And of course, people have varying opinions on that. So we get it all out on the field. But I really do think that connection can be made, because we are essentially the judge and jury out there. And sometimes you got two coaches pleading their case, right, to the judge, and the judge or the judges are going to come up with what the ultimate determination is. We have plays where, let's say I make a call, I'm out on the bases, and maybe there's a tag. It was hard to see. We only got two umpires out there. It's hard to see the tag. We'll have one coach come out and make his case, and he wants us to meet with the other umpire. So we'll meet with the other umpire and come to a decision. Now we might have the other coach. We got to go explain to the other coach what we're doing. So it is almost like two lawyers arguing, right, with the judges on the field. There are similarities, certainly.
Do you see larger life dramas playing out on the field? In other words, the game is metaphor for larger themes and all the emotions around, if I dare say, bigger things in life?
Well, sometimes. I think that's a good way to put it, but oftentimes, it seems to us, at least, seems to the umpires, that the game is the biggest thing on that day to the people who are out there, the players and the coaches. And when we're out there, we have to treat it as the biggest thing on that day. And you would say, well, this isn't war and peace. But if you ever said to a coach or a player in the middle of a competition, this isn't war and peace, well, that wouldn't go over very well. So to them at that moment, it is war and peace. And that's how we have to treat every day, is that it's war and peace out there. Those 9 innings or those 6 innings or those 3 hours, really, there is no bigger thing than the game when we're out there. That's how we have to handle it.
Do you feel that attitudes toward umpires by the public at large, or the folks that you're dealing with, that those attitudes have changed in the last 5-10 years?
Yes, we all feel that way. I think we all feel that it has gotten worse with time in terms of just the sheer volume of complaints or reports that we're seeing. A lot of umpire associations would require a report after a game, a post-game report, if there is an incident or if there's a problem between the teams. And what we saw, at least in our case, was that starting around 2017, there was a sharp rise in the number of reports that we're getting, the number of incidents that were being reported. The only explanation that we can come up with for that is that the American dialogue, I think it's fair to say, whether you support one side of the political aisle or the other side of the political aisle, at that time was a very heated dialogue, just the reality of it. People on both sides felt very strongly about how they felt. So that's when we saw that the uptick in noise on the field, shall we say, and it really has not dissipated. I did see a few positive signs this year, not enough, but a few, where people would come up after games or during games, they would tell each other, hey, calm down. It's just a kid's game out there. But that's what we've seen. We've seen it go up and perhaps mirroring society in terms of the conflict, in terms of the just general disposition toward authority, right?
So your job is more difficult.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a lot more days that are days of managing conflict and trying to resolve conflict than we did. I would say that it used to be you'd have a few problem games a season, let's say, and now you might have 20 to 30% of your games that can be a problem or require you to put out some fires.
This goes back a little bit to some of our earlier words about sportsmanship. Do you see sports as a socializing activity for young people? And where's that going forward?
Yes. And I hope it goes back in the direction it was. It's funny, when I was playing Little League and Babe Ruth League, we did not have the iPhone yet. It's hard to believe, right? Just in 10 years plus, the amount of change that we've seen in technology and having it at your fingertips, everybody feels like kids are indoors, they're on their phone, they're on the tablet, they're on this, they're on that, they're not getting out there playing the game. And what I see on the field is that it's a great outlet for everybody who's out there. You get outside, you get some exercise, you're interacting with other humans in person, live and in person. And so that's really something I hope we don't lose. Just because you can play your friend in MLB The Show and see his picture on the corner now, I hope we don't lose going out there and playing him on the ball field, because it's just a totally different form of being social. It's the one that I was used to as a kid. Let's say that, right? When I moved up to Babe Ruth League, that was the first time I had a cell phone. It was one of those old cell phones that you'd flip it up and there was the little tiny keys that you could text with underneath, right? And it's crazy now what's available at their fingertips. And it's just totally different. But I'm glad that the fabric of the game has not changed, and you don't have kids out there with phones. They're just out there enjoying the moment. That's, to me, a throwback in a sense, and I hope we can keep that tradition.
Matt, you're still quite young, but you've been at this quite a long time and have a lot of experience. If you were going to give yourself some advice, the person that just started out in this endeavor, what advice would you give him?
The first thing I would say, as we talked about the timing and the positioning thing, what a difference that can make for a young umpire. So if I could go back and focus from day one on those two things, that's what I try and instill in the newer umpires that I train. That just gives you so much confidence in what you're doing. And I always got pretty high marks from when I started, and I appreciate that. But we've come such a long way in terms of umpire training and with the timing and positioning. When I talked to you earlier, we talked about the wedge and the keyhole and these type of terms that we use now to talk about positioning. These things have all come after I started. These things have come during my umpiring career. We didn't talk about the wedge or the keyhole when I started. We just sat there and tried to get the call right. I mean, of course, we talked about positioning, but we didn't have these concepts. These concepts are new to umpiring. Really, the instant replay being invented at the major league level has helped umpires get more plays right, because there's so much tape now on these close calls and where the umpire was positioned and how they could have seen it better. So in that sense, even though I told you already I don't like it, it has helped us get better at the lower levels because there's so much available information in the information highway, shall we say. So I wish that my younger self, starting out, would have had some of that information highway, not to learn maybe some bad habits in terms of positioning and timing in the early going. And, in the broader sense, we talk about how society has changed in these 10 to 15 years. I would hope that new umpires know when they start out, if they stick with it, if they do a good job with it, that they can really stick with it as something that is a very valuable thing in life. They can make money doing it. They can freelance doing it. That's what we are as a freelancer. And also, We talk now about technical schools becoming more popular with kids. If someone's got the skills with the umpiring, they can level up. They could go work college baseball eventually. Major League Baseball is trying to make it more accessible for people to get a chance to try out, basically, to get into the minor leagues. They're doing one-day camps across the country now. That's a new thing. That never existed. When I was in high school or getting ready to graduate high school, there was the Umpire School, which is a 5-week program down in Florida, but there was never these one-day camps that made it accessible to get like major league training as a younger umpire for a day and meet these people that have been there and done that. Maybe my answer to your question is not so much something that was available to my younger self at the time, but it would be now to say, look at all these extra tools that are available to these new guys that are starting out as umpires and use these to your advantage, because a lot has changed in 10 to 15 years.
Matt, thanks so much for coming in and doing this show. It's always a pleasure talking with you. Maybe we could do it here again, but it's also good to have lunch sometime too.
Yes, sir. Well, thanks for having me, Bob. And it was certainly an interesting discussion for me, reflecting on all of it as we are at the close of the season. We closed out the season at the beginning of the month with some cold baseball. It does remind me as we talk here about the passion that we all have for the game, umpires, players, coaches, fans, and so many little things that I might know from an umpire's perspective and that a coach could teach me, that a player could teach me from their perspective. Probably if anybody's stuck around long enough here, they've heard things like that wedge and that keyhole that they've never heard of before, right? It just shows you how many intricate details there are involved in our great game. So it's been a pleasure to talk to you about it, certainly.
Fantastic. Take care, Matt. Thanks so much. Thank you for joining us in this episode of Where the Twain Meet. And please check out future programming at our website, wherethetwainmeet.com.